Organizing and writing letters is a critical component of business correspondence. In this presentation, we will identify some patterns of organization, discuss approaches to organizing sentences and paragraphs, evaluate when to use direct versus indirect approach, and apply direct and indirect approach to writing situations. Let's get started. Two basic patterns exist for organizing your data in written correspondence. For written correspondence, group ideas into patterns. There are two patterns to follow. One is the direct pattern for receptive audiences. The other is the indirect pattern for unreceptive audiences. If audiences are receptive, then a direct pattern of organization should be used. This would mean that the good news would take place toward the top of the paragraph of the letter, as shown in this picture. Anytime your audience is pleased with a response or mildly interested in a response, or even if the audience is neutral, a direct pattern should be used. Let's take a look at this example together. Here, right away in the opening paragraph, we have the customer service representative referring to the date of the customer's correspondence. So he's indicating that he's received the letter about the damaged shipment and acknowledging the inconvenience that it has caused the customer. Offering this kind of buffer lets the customer know that the company sympathizes with the reader. The second paragraph goes on to apologize and announce the good news. Notice that the first sentence announced that the $240 adjustment on the damage to the 2 crates of Belgian crystal stemware will be granted. The customer will be open and receptive to the explanation then of what has happened to the product. The customer service person also goes on to explain what happened, the cause of the problem, and how the problem will be resolved. This lets the customer exactly know what's going on in the process. The closing paragraph offers a timeline for completing the action. You can expect the full reimbursement within 2 weeks after our representative's inspection. Finally, that closing paragraph ends with a polite statement which reinforces the business relationship. I hope this unfortunate accident will not keep you from having merchandise shipped by Green Tree Freight in the future. This is a great direct approach example. But sometimes writers have to take an indirect pattern approach. An indirect pattern announces the good news at the end of the letter instead of at the beginning. And the reason for this is because the writer wants the reader to be receptive to the information being offered. An indirect approach should be used anytime an audience is unwilling or uninterested, displeased or disappointed, or even hostile about the outcome of the situation. Let's take a look at an example of Mrs. Hughes' letter saying no. In the opening again, the date of the customer's correspondence is referred to by the customer relations person. And also, again, a buffer is offered, thanking the reader for taking the time to write. This lets the reader know that the writer sympathizes with the reader. Now, this second paragraph is a little bit different. Notice that this paragraph explains the problem but does not directly blame the reader. It's very important in business not to blame the customer or the reader for the problem. A firm decision is given at the end of the paragraph along with an explanation. This helps the reader see that the property will not be covered. They're not going to get a refund. However, the customer service person wants to reinforce that relationship with the customer. So they're going to turn the no into a yes. Because you are a valued customer, we are happy to reship a replacement order of the crystal to you at no charge. You can expect the replacement crystal within 2 weeks of placing your order. Notice here that the letter also ends politely without referencing the problem again, and reinforces the relationship with the customer. In your letter, be careful not to accuse, scold, or blame. Let's take a look at some patterns. When you're writing any kind of business correspondence, consider which pattern you're going to use, a direct pattern or an indirect pattern. A direct pattern saves the reader time. Busy people devote very few minutes to each message. If the message is too long to get to the point, the correspondence might lose the reader. Also, a direct pattern sets proper time frame in mind. Learning the purpose up front helps the reader put the rest of the information into perspective. Without a clear opening, the reader might be thinking, why am I being told this information? And finally, a direct pattern prevents frustration. If the reader has to wade through a lot of verbiage to get to the message, they might get annoyed or get frustrated. Direct patterns should be used in things like routine requests, responses to customers, orders and acknowledgments, non-sensitive memos, emails, informational reports, and oral presentations. Indirect patterns respect the feelings of an audience. Bad news is painful. It's helpful to prepare the reader by giving them information before letting them down with the bad news. Indirect patterns also encourage a fair hearing. If the reader is upset right away by bad news, the rest of the message is lost and may cause the reader to stop reading. Using an indirect pattern minimizes a negative reaction to improve the message if it's delivered gently. Indirect patterns should be used for bad news, ideas that require persuasion, and any kind of news that could be sensitive to the reader. When using any kind of approach, be sure to emphasize the most important ideas first. Position these at the beginning of the sentence. Make sure the most important idea is the subject of the sentence. Place the main idea in a short sentence. So, for example, a new machine is on its way to you. Or, if you're using an indirect approach, we have examined your machine and found the issue. Another hint for being direct would be using the active voice for most sentences. In a direct approach, this is especially good because it puts the action first. For example, we lost money. This says who did the action right away, we did the action, we lost the money. Or I sent the email message yesterday. I is doing the action, I sent the email. The subject is the performer in active voice, and this helps to move the message along. There are situations, though, where you should use passive voice. This helps to de-emphasize the performer or to be tactful. In the case of the indirect approach letter, for example, it takes the blame off of the customer and puts it in a neutral tone. For example, money was lost. This doesn't say I lost the money or you lost the money. It was just lost by somebody, by us. Or the email message was sent yesterday. This doesn't say who sent the message, but we might use the test question to ask by whom and fill it in with the performer. This would help you identify whether or not the phrasing was in passive voice. To create effective paragraphs, be sure that each paragraph only has one topic. You'll notice that our letter to Mrs. Hughes was broken down into 3 to 4 short paragraphs. Get to the point right away. Don't hedge or hesitate. Use concise sentences and link ideas. Discussing one topic in each paragraph helps you group similar ideas together. Be sure to start a new paragraph for each topic and keep paragraph lengths to 8 to 10 lines at the max. Arrange sentences using a strategic plan. In a direct plan, for example, main sentence should be followed by supporting sentences for defining, classifying, illustrating, and describing ideas. In an indirect plan, supporting sentences should be followed by the main sentence for describing causes, followed by effects. Let's take a look at an example. In this case, a direct approach is used. I recommend we establish an optional business casual policy that allows consultants to dress casually if they wish. According to a recent poll, more than half of all white-collar workers are now dressing casually at work. In our own business, our consultants say they stand out like sore thumbs because they dress in traditional suits. Why would this direct approach be useful? Now, here's an example of an indirect approach. According to a recent poll, more than half of all white-collar workers are now dressing casually at work. In our own business, our consultants say they stand out like sore thumbs because they dress in traditional suits. Therefore, I recommend we establish an optional business casual policy that allows consultants to dress casually if they wish. Why would this writer take an indirect approach? As you write or prepare to write for your business correspondence, consider which approach would be more appropriate to the rhetorical situation of your writing correspondence.